Good morning, Christina.
Hi, good morning. I was a bit stressed trying to include your log.
Don't worry about it.
No, okay, I tell you, it has a particular application, and I cannot do it. What
That's fine.
do is when
I
we
should have thought about it
finish.
earlier.
I think when we finish, you can introduce your logos in the PowerPoint, and then we can upload the presentation for students, okay?
Yep, okay. That's
and
fine.
I think also maybe you can include Francesco, the one on WeWorld, and Roger, the MSF, yeah, or whatever. Okay, I think we still have some minutes. So everyone is online is saying Bill, but I think I don't know how many people we have. Okay.
We have 13 right now, so most people aren't online yet.
Yeah, no, I think we should start at 10 because it's the time that is foreseen. So we've been already discussing among ourselves. I think, okay, I will introduce you first, the panel, and then upload the presentation. We have done this Zoom with presentation, so students can see the presentation and can see you speaking. So it's not that they just see the presentation. Unless you prefer that we don't share it and then we upload it. What do you think?
Sharing it is okay, yeah.
Yeah, share it.
So what you think we share the presentation now so students can follow?
Yeah, I think I mean, it might be good, yeah.
Okay. So I'm just going to see that it works also.
And Christina, you're going to be the one managing the slides, right?
Yeah. If you see that I'm slow or whatever, just tell me next. I don't mind that you are. Okay, that's no problem. So tell me if I think they see the four of us and you see,
yes.
Yeah? Okay. Great.
And in the live stream, we will see the slides and then whoever is speaking. So that's also looks quite good.
Yeah, so Bill, can you tell us what you see? You see us on the right side, the four of us, and then the PowerPoint is clear?
Yeah, I just clicked out of that mode because I wanted to make sure everything's working with the live stream as well. But yeah, you guys are on the right side. I see the four of you, and then the PowerPoint is sort of in the middle, the main screen. So.
Okay. Okay, so I just need to go through your bios. I thought I was going to have a lot of time and I didn't. I think you know each other, no? I mean, at least Francesco and Roger do know each other from Palestine, and Phil Connors, it's our colleague from Deakin University. So we have been exchanging emails, but maybe you have not seen. Oh no, wait. First thing I have to do, switch off my phone.
Nice to meet you, Phil.
Yeah, we didn't have the pleasure yet, but now it's all remote.
Yes.
First encounters.
Nice to meet you guys too.
It's a pleasure.
But something I'm facing, Phil and Roger, now that we are getting acquainted to this way of speaking and sharing materials, I think we can use this for lecturing together, or or asking you to participate in lectures. That will be great. So
that would be great. Yes.
Yeah, it gives more opportunity actually to share and discuss things.
Absolutely.
We're also organizing our trainings like this in MSF. We're having at the end of the year like this training for coordination positions, and we're struggling to try to convert everything into remote.
Yeah. Same thing here.
Yeah.
Forces you out
Yes.
because there are things that are pretty hands-on, but it really forces you to try to look for new ways. That's interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, it's exactly what we're doing. We're converting what would normally be a 5-day live, 24-hour-a-day simulation into a digital process, and that's a killer.
Yeah. We have less carbon footprint, but yeah, it's not the same.
The only missing part are the beers after the sessions, right? These we haven't been able yet to convert them into remote.
Yeah, that's the pity about this being remote all the time. Yeah, it's
Because it is true, because for programs such as the intensive program, you really take a lot of advantage of the informal contact. No, you get also with other students on side events or at the end of the sessions, or just sleeping in the same floor with other people. That's a pity.
well, yeah. This. I think it's. I hope this is really an exceptional time. Yeah, I don't like at all this expression of the new normality. I don't think this should not be at all the new normality. Shouldn't be, and I hope it's not going to be. But we are learning to adapt. I mean, I think we in humanitarian action mode, I mean, we are very good at that. So I switch off the phone so I don't have any watch. Please let me know when it's 10, yeah? Oh yeah, I see it here. So 3 minutes.
Yeah. So will we ever get to the stage of doing virtual humanitarian action?
Let's see, it will come out from someone at a certain point. Let's see how does it look like.
I've seen some organizations doing it already. And claiming to be the real one.
And drones going and delivering. Stepping.
Exactly.
But don't worry, reporting will be perfectly done still. Don't worry about it.
Yes, some things don't change.
I know.
And in fact, guys, you do most things remotely nowadays, in any case, yeah?
For us, it's quite challenging because basically all our team of research and everything are in 7 different countries. So we used to meet a couple of times per year, at least, to have some, strategy thinking and everything. And now it's all easy remote. It's not easy. We have been testing creative ways of doing Zoom and Teams, like also exercises and things. Try to do what you normally do there as an icebreaker in person, trying to do it in Teams, but it's not the same way.
Yes.
No, for us in Yemen, it has been quite okay. In fact, the whole country was locked down in the way that they just closed the borders, but then they let us move around. So we did not feel that much of the remote, and we got trapped inside. So yeah, so it wasn't remote at all. Apparently it is now where things are changing a little bit.
Yeah, for us in Tunis was the same, and it was a sort of even internal lockdown, but it was really, really open. I mean, the first 5-6 days were we couldn't move, but then it was really free.
In fact,
Yeah, because you just
speak to you. The situation of migrants in Yemen have been tiring, yeah?
It's a pity because it was one of the interventions we wanted to start thinking about. All those migrants that are crossing from Eritrea and so on, arriving from the south, crossing the whole country upwards, going to the north and trying to get into Saudi Arabia and going through horrendous experiences. The reality is that they are quite invisible to us and to all our programs. We had many meetings with all sections seeing like, do you guys see them in your hospital? Do they appear? Because one of the main issues is that they fear that if they show up to health facilities such as hospitals or clinics, they're going to get taken and they're going to be sent back, or they're going to be put in prison and tortured and so on. So we were trying to learn from the experiences we have in Mexico and Guatemala with the migrants also that have roots that are well known but quite informal, and then COVID arrived, and so we had to switch priorities. But that was one of my dreamed interventions, to be able to follow migrants all across Yemen from south to north and try to understand the dynamics of such a thing, because it's now one of the biggest routes in the world. After the ones in the Mediterranean have been sort of like reduced or even shut down.
Yeah, but it's extremely tough. In Libya, we are following more or less the same, trying to understand. We know the routes, but it's really, really difficult to track them, and also to have different points in understanding how their situation is deteriorating. Even when you track them at one point, then you lose at the second, exactly for the same reason. And interestingly, also, we are looking at the same work that we have in Guatemala and Mexico, because, yeah, more or less it's the same logic. But it's really tough.
We need to follow up this discussion, because we could do a very interesting research project on this question. Okay, it's already 10, so minute past. So good morning to everybody. Thank you for joining us in today's panel. In fact, it's the last panel of the NOAA intensive program on the Triple Nexus and the challenges of setting boundaries to humanitarianism. I have the pleasure to introduce you to our three panelists. Roger Gutierrez, is a humanitarian worker with a background on political science and international relations, specialized in emergency response, and a former NOAA alumni. He was 8 years of experience in consultancy, project management, and strategic planning, both in international organizations and NGOs. And for the last 6 years, he's been working with MSF in different contexts, including Ethiopia, Sudan, Yemen, Syria, and Central African Republic, responding to emergencies in very unstable contexts. And his last assignment has been head of emergencies of MSF in Yemen, responding to the COVID-19 emergency in the northern part of the country. I also have the pleasure to introduce you to Francesco Michele. Francesco has 14 years of experience in the management of evaluations and humanitarian development programs in Central America, Middle East, and North Africa. He's currently coordinating international advocacy and innovation within the Italian NGO We Work, GVC. And Francesco is specialized in combining human rights and its approaches to reinforce the capacities of communities to engage and being engaged in actions supporting them in complex crises. So he's indeed a specialist in protection. And during the last 7 years, he and his team has developed a model and methodology of community protection approach. And last but not least, I want to introduce you to one of our associate partners colleagues, Professor Phil Connors. He's Associate Professor of Humanitarian Studies in the Faculty of Arts and Education at Deakin University. He's the founder of the Center for Humanitarian Leadership at the University of Deakin. And his expertise lies in exploring the transition from humanitarian assistance to development and what may enhance or limit local leadership in the sector. He has authored several works on community development and transformative change. He has a PhD in community economic development and has more than 30 years of experience in practice, teaching, and researching community participation and leadership. So we have a very experienced panel for the topic that we are going to deal with. We have collectively prepared a PowerPoint so you can follow a bit the discussion, because something we are facing is that some of you might have experience in the field, some of you might have been following different discussion on this topic, but it might be that for some of you is a new topic, and we thought it might be good to start with some concepts and then try to structure the discussion. So what what is the nexus? Why it has come to now to the international, to the discussion in humanitarian action? Well, you have been hearing probably during the IP that there is an increasingly number of protected and recurrent nature of crises. We have a range of overlapping and compounding needs in different parts of the world and rising uncertainty within context. So there is a greater urgency to respond quickly and to address different inequalities that put certain groups at particular and long-term risk. Marginalized communities, women, youth, and there is a need to sustain the different actions from different actors. So there is a need to have a more joined up approach, to offer opportunities to respond more effectively and holistically to people's needs. And to reflect this understanding, the concept of humanitarian development and peace nexus has emerged. So what is this triple nexus? What is new? Because there is an ongoing discussion for many years on linking relief, rehabilitation, development. What is different this time? And which are the challenges and opportunities? So the triple nexus, as the name says, is about the interlinkages between humanitarian development and peace actors and how they can work better together in the field. So this is what the UN calls the new way of working. So the different actors are supposed to work to which is called collective outcomes over multiple years when appropriate. So it might change in different contexts. So the approach seeks to capitalize on the comparative advantages of the different sectors to reduce needs, risk, and vulnerability following the recommendations of the World Humanitarian Summit and in accordance with the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals agenda. So it's originally focused on removing the unnecessary barriers. So it's about trying to not work in silos and hindering collaboration between humanitarian development actors. And when the Secretary General Antonio Guterres came into office, he added a new leg into this discussion, the sustaining peace. So it's the third leg, humanitarian. So it's about the linkages between humanitarian and development and peace. And it's linked to an ongoing discussion on the reform of the UN system. So we have a focus on what? On working collaboratively, trying to complement the different work of the different actors and trying to avoid these boundaries. So trying to work on the basis of the comparative advantages of each community. This sounds very good, but it's not that easy to do in the field. So it links, as I mentioned, to these big themes that are on the UN reform agenda on prioritize prevention, strengthen the focus on the field, try to deliver on the sustainable development goals, and break down the silos between the different communities. You are going to have the presentation if you go to deepen on different issues, but this is for you to have an overview. So what is new? Well, the concept is not new. The nexus is about continuing different discussion that has been already for the last 20 years about linking relief, rehabilitation, and development. The emphasis on more coherent approach links with former discussions on how to work on a comprehensive approach, how to integrate the different actors, how can we build on resilience. However, now there is something new, which is the need to plan together, do joint analysis, and try to work on multi-financial projects. So what is new is effort on try to build on collective outcomes. This has been placed as a commitment coming from the World Humanitarian Summit it was summarized in the commitment to action and signed by the Secretary General of the UN and the 8 UN principles of the World of the UN, endorsed by the World Bank. This will be mentioned also by Phil later on, and the International Organization for Migration. So there is now really an effort for all actors to come together, think together, and try to work towards collective outcomes. So it's linking all these UN reform, the grand bargain, the comprehensive refugee response framework. So this is what is new, that it seems that now there is the momentum really to further push this new and old agenda. So I would like now to give the floor to Roger, who is going to speak about the perspectives from an organization that works on emergency response. Please, Roger, you have the floor.
Thank you, Christina. Good morning, everyone, and thanks for inviting me to the session. I aim at spending only 5, less than 10 minutes actually on bringing a little bit the perspectives from an international organization that is very used to work in emergency response in the front lines, and what is the relationship and the challenges, but also the opportunities we see to the Nexus. No, that one of the first messages that I think it's important to know is that Nexus is a process that it's coming, that it's here. So it's not so much about whether this is right or wrong, or how, or if this is going to finally be implemented. It is here, and this is finally. It's more about the challenges and opportunities that this presents, and how can we all work together. No. If we go to the next slide, Christina. Before going into the analysis, I want to present, of course, the approach that and the biases that I have my own. Because with such a complex process, probably what the three of us are presenting are just limited perspectives based on our own knowledge, the ways in which we work in the sector, but also our own experience and the organizations that we've been working for. In my case, most of my experience have been, as Christina was saying, in acute crisis and highly politicized context. I've also worked in some protracted crises in which the nexus can be the nexus and its implications can be felt differently. And of course, the second point that is the bias on the analysis that I have myself is that I've been working with MSF, which you probably all know that it's an emergency organization that whose, I would say, foremost objective is to stay and deliver, right? And to be always at the front line for here and now. And one of the concepts that we like to say, which is the bed for the night, we chose as a mandate in MSF to be the ones providing support to the populations on the moment of the acute crisis, sometimes at the expense of longer term objectives and more development related objectives, because we do think that that these are roles that other organizations accomplish. So in terms of the implementation of the Nexus, what we are worried about and the challenges that we see are linked to the fact of having the humanitarian agenda and the real emergency response these first weeks or months of intervention in acute complex crises being sometimes aligned with much longer term interventions or objectives. No? So I wanted to start with the conclusions first. This is going to be a short presentation because I think it's more important for the three of us to listen. What do you think about the Nexus, and to guide us a little bit on what do you want to talk about this. So I decided to just go ahead and share the conclusions first, and then talk a little bit more of threats and challenges of opportunities. You see them here, right? For us, and my own perspective is also that, yes, the Nexus is a new step to integrate the humanitarian imperative into a wider agenda that might go from poverty reduction to peace building to counter-terrorism in the last years in places like Nigeria, for instance. And that this is yet a new step, not a new one, but another step on trying to increase this push to align the humanitarian actors and the humanitarian principles and actions with the broader developmental and even political goals. No? We do think from MSF that it makes sense that, of course, the responses are complementary, but one of the main challenges that we see, that you will see it in the next slide, is precisely that we feel that complementarity should not mean alignment, and that we should all coordinate with each other, but maybe not being coordinated by others, which is one of the main the main opinions that as MSF, as an independent and neutral organization, we always have. So yes, there's this increasing push to align the humanitarian action with broader developmental and political goals. These might work in some contexts. In others, in the ones that I have experienced, which, as I said, they're complex, they're acute, they're highly politicized, this sometimes doesn't work that well. So yes, the third conclusion that we want to present, or that I want to present, is this alignment versus complementarity. So of course, humanitarian action should make sense and should be integrated into a wider response, but it should not be aligned with certain agendas that clearly are far away from being humanitarian, such as political or peace-building agendas that might have actors that you probably know already are involved that do not follow the same principles that we do follow. So the last conclusion is this one, that the Nexus presents some challenges, also some opportunities, but Nexus is here and this is what we're dealing with. So better to properly discuss it and to see how can we all make it work as a humanitarian system in itself. I wanted to go very quick through 4 different challenges. The first one, we've mentioned it a little bit, and this is something that is gonna sound so familiar probably. If you've had these conversations, and all throughout the masters, you're gonna keep hearing about this because it's been a challenge for decades. It's the growing politicization of the humanitarian response, right? So again, as I was mentioning, the humanitarian effort is put at the service of a wider effort that sometimes has nothing to do with the humanitarian intervention, such as political processes and peace negotiations. I come back right now from Yemen, which is a highly politicized context in which sometimes the efforts of many humanitarian organizations have been put on a second line of priorities versus the effort of the political, say, branch of the UN and the international organizations on trying to put forward the efforts for building a peace agreement between the different parties. So some of the parties, such as in the north, the Houthis, we do feel as a MSF sometimes that other organizations have not pushed enough to be able to get access or to be able to finish or reduce the hindering of humanitarian action and access by the Houthis, just because they are also a political body and they did not want to change the efforts of the rest of the branches of the UN on trying to not to antagonize one of the parties that is part of the conflict and that is involved in the negotiations. That brings, of course, a lot of perceptions, right, by the warring parties and by the authorities on the independence and the neutrality of the humanitarian actors. All of a sudden, and I remember this from South Sudan as well, in Malakal, where I had the chance to work, where for the population and for most of the militias and so on, we were all identified as the same body, like these guys that come from outside and that are also involved somehow in the war, because we see them wearing blue helmets, we see them also delivering food, we see them putting saving people in hospitals, but we really do not know who they are, so we consider them all the same. One of the big challenges we always have in MSF is and that we put a lot of effort is on trying to keep our own identity and stay away a little bit from all the rest of the humanitarian organizations, because as much as we fully respect the work that they're doing, we think and we like to work in a different way, and we like to keep our neutrality and our independence. And we sometimes feel that the only chance that we have on getting access or on improving our security is by getting differentiated from the rest of the humanitarian actors and the rest of the actors that are not only humanitarian but also political and security. What's happening with this sort of loss of perception? Most of the contexts where I've been working, the humanitarian actors are being forced to have less and less presence because militias intrastate groups are not allowing them to go and to be able to do assessment or to operate in the areas under their control, because they think they're part of the conflict and they think they're just there to gather intel or information, and that they have a hidden agenda. That forces these, combined with the fact that we think that the Nexus is bringing more funding and more actors to certain areas that are geostrategic, but not so much in areas that are with protected crises and needs. This is bringing less presence of actors in certain areas, which entails and brings less analysis, less capacity to be there and to be responsive. So at the end of the day, we have actors that are not having the proper tools or the presence to be able to see what's going on actually on the front lines, and then to do programs and interventions accordingly. Because of that, because then there's now only certain areas where many of actors can have presence, this is bringing the humanitarian action, the funds and the interest of the donors towards areas that are, say, a bit more popular and sexy towards the donors and the international community rather than others, and not so much based on a set of objective criteria. So this creates a growing concentration of actors and responses in certain areas that maybe they are not the most needed in terms of real needs of the population, but are geostrategic or important by other powers that are far from the humanitarian actors. No, and I can think of the example of Syria, in which, for instance, most of the humanitarian access and hence the humanitarian response was provided in government areas, no, rather than areas like Azaz, Aleppo, or in Idlib, where the FSA and the government did not have control of it, and the FSA was ruling. These are four of the main challenges, and these challenges you will hear not only because of the Nexus, but, and again, not because this is a new thing. It has been happening for decades. So we want to also look at the opportunities, and if we go to the next slide, we'll see a couple of opportunities that we see in MSF. The first one is that we do feel in some contexts that there's, because of this more comprehensive approach and more actors being involved in certain areas, including big donors, there's a commitment for a stronger focus on multi-year programs, which we think it's important as well. And because that gives the organizations, both international and national, more vision and on what can there be the resources and plans on the coming years. No, one of the big challenges we face in MSF is that when we come into an emergency, and after a few weeks or months, we wanna get out of the place because we feel it is need also for other actors to step in. It is kind of difficult to find actors to replace or to take over our interventions, because we sometimes come across them and they'll tell us, listen, I do not know if I'm going to have funding more than 3 or 6 months. So how do you want me to take over a hospital or to start a primary healthcare center to complement your activities if I'm not able to see the funding? No, so we do think that these multi-year programs and this funding more stable will make it easier for these organizations to be able to bridge that gap between humanitarian response and development. We also hear from the colleagues in here, and I would like to hear the rest of the colleagues in here, because they have much more experience on this, that Nexus works a bit better, that in some contexts that are more stable and maybe less politicized. All in all, again, there's challenges, there's opportunities, but the debate must be that the Nexus is here and that we should be aware of what it is. You guys, as humanitarians joining the sector right now, need to be very aware of what is this, because it's the main process that is driving then smaller processes that actually have impact on the field, and that you need to know their implications, and again, see how can you make it work, and what are the opportunities we see to be able to better link the humanitarian response with later efforts and more longer term efforts, which are essential to be able to improve the lives and the needs of the populations. I'm gonna finish in here because I want to leave the space for the rest of the colleagues, and then of course, super happy to respond to any questions or debates that might arise with students.
Thank you very much, Roger. Francesco, when you want.
Thank you, Christina. Can you all hear me? Well, first of all, thank you very much to everyone for participating, for my fellow panelists, and thanks, Roger, for the brilliant insights on one of the main problematic. Okay, what is exactly the boundary for to keep an unpoliticized humanitarian work, which is the key of the matter. One of the key of the matters. I will build on a bit our experience on this. Our experience is one of an organization that in the last 7 years, so even before the World Humanitarian Summit, has been trying to work on an approach and methodology at community level, at local level, to provide the good platform for different actors to express their potential. We have seen we are a double mandated agency, and we've been working with several partners in protracted crisis. And one of the problematic we always have seen that for us, it was really tricky to understand when we could jump in with our development work. So that was the key of the matter. So again, as Roger, I like to present some challenges, will be a bit different, will be more operational challenges of in implementing now the Nexus. What are the operational challenges that we faced, and what we have been start identifying as the determinants if we want this Nexus agenda to work. And then I will close up with a bit our perspective, which is one of try to apply a framework, which is the framework of integrated protection. Christina, if you can go to the next slide. So first and foremost, there is you're going to hear this word localization, which is again a buzzword that probably has not been grounded very well on what it means. There are a lot of theories, a lot of application, but I believe that us as humanitarian international organization, we don't have still the instruments to do it. In a nutshell, means that we cannot, even the Nexus, if we want to work collaboratively, we have to find ways to use the knowledge of community population and local actors. Without that, we don't go anywhere. I mean, one of the concepts of the Nexus is the best placed actors, or the comparative advantage. One of the challenges I would like to point out is that sometimes the best placed actors, even in condition of access, is our local actors, but we don't have the instruments to support or enforce or even involving them in all the planning process or the project process. This goes hand to hand with another challenges. All the challenges that I want to point out are related to the way we work now. Okay, so I think there are elements that we really have to consider. One of the things that the Nexus propose is joined up analysis. So it's key if in a world of clusterization of the humanitarian sector for efficiency and professionalization, which we need in acute crisis, of course, we siloed and we create efficient system. Now we have to find a way to make them communicate. So there are still very good efforts in system multi-sector comprehensive analysis process from the humanitarian and the development sector. One of the things that we have been observed is that they either serve humanitarian projects or development projects. Still, we are far from having a comprehensive analysis framework that allows us to jump in with programming, so data, basically. We're speaking about data that we can collect, that can really serve the programming both of humanitarian or development without speaking about the political peace component. So as you can see in my presentation, there are words that I kept in orange. Those are the key words that I would like you to keep in the debate. Everyone speaks about multi-sector, siloed approach and everything. Now we have to think ourselves to do a mapping of if we have a system analysis that can really serve the Nexus. That's one of the big elements. And on this, building a bit on what Roger was saying before, one thing that we really have to recognize, sometimes it's because of different competing interests of us, organization, UN agency, other actors and everything. Sometimes it's for specific reason. We don't have still, we are not advanced, we are not so advanced yet in having good agreement in terms of data sharing. If we don't find ways of not owning the data and making sure that it's really on the hand of other actors that can use it for the better, we can speak about the Nexus, but operationally we cannot deliver very easily. I make a very simple example of this, speaking about our organization. The majority of our projects are donor funded. So the data we collect, the report we do, the information and the monitoring are first and foremost for reporting. That data, it's data that can serve my project, can serve my donor, can serve our analysis, but rarely it's a data that if it doesn't go beyond the sector and it doesn't include other factors, that can be used by another actors. Okay, sometimes our own reporting, and I'm trying to put some elements for the debate afterwards, might tell us that yes, we deliver, but we didn't change the situation, because it's not just responding to the need that solve a problem, but it's actually acting on the cause. And here is one of the other problems that we have seen. The majority of data collection that we have being based on project is rather output based on numbers, elements, needs, which are very good to deliver efficiently. But if we don't manage in the Nexus process in finding ways to analyze the causes, we cannot enact other actors' intervention. I make a very, very simple example: lack of water. So there is a huge need of water. Very simply, and I don't want to simplify too much, but very simply, the cause can be that there is no water in the water source, but the other, or the cause can be that there is a perpetrator, a violent group that is blocking the water source. The two interventions we need two completely set of action, but if we don't have data and information that allow us systematically to collect where is the cause, we don't have the bridges to link with any other actor and enact other complementary actions. Next slide, Christina, please. This transforming a bit and looking at the challenges as opportunities, we consider that there are ways, there are mechanisms. So as on the first point, as Roger is saying, sometimes at the first response, the first humanitarian response, we need to intervene. Okay, so we cannot, of course, think about completely all the developmental objective or involve the population as we would do in a developmental process. Yet, with the proper dialogue, with the proper conversation, I believe that even at the first humanitarian stage, there are elements that we can introduce to better involve the population. Because sometimes we have this complete mandate of substitution, and it's okay when it's an initial step. I mean, as we envisioned the humanitarian system many years ago, it's to be effective at the first stage. But now the problem is that we have protracted crisis, politicized crisis, so we have humanitarian crisis lasting 10 years. But we're still using the same mechanism of humanitarian intervention after years and years and years and years. That's problematic. So we have really to find a way to go back and defining the step when humanitarian kicks in and when developmental kicks in, or we have to start rethinking all our instruments. In rethinking our instruments, we have to go back and look at our system of multi-framework analysis. The one pushed by the UN system that are very effective in helping in coordinating needs and on other instruments that are out there. But there is something that for me is key. We have to find a way to use the data and analyze and be very honest among all of each other, how to identify who is the best actor that can implement or can step in. And I speak even on my organization. I mean, I'm saying this, but it's a huge debate. Sometimes we come out with our analysis and we say, oh, it would be better to that instead of us, MSF should kick in. I mean, I'm making an example of the panelists. But then you have the competing interest, you have donors, you have projects. So it's not very easy. We are not at that level yet. So multi-annual framework, multi-annual strategy are for us as well one of the key to the matter. But one thing that I would like to say that this will arrive late. So now we really have to think what we can do. We have routine projects. So at the humanitarian level, we have 6 months, 1 year, when we're lucky 2 years, 1.5 years projects. And then we have developmental processes. They don't start at the same time, but we all have one thing in common. We have the territorial presence, not just one organization, different organization, we have that territorial presence. So one of the things that we have to think, and we have seen that it's key now, is that we have to increase the collaboration and the complementarity and the coherence at that level. So at territorial level, use our joint presence to analyze together the situation. So I can have a specific analysis on needs and an organization specific analysis on rights, but we have to go in that direction. And of course, to do that, we have to start introducing instruments that are also for analyzing the situation that comes from social analysis, because if we just keep collecting needs-based only, which is good for the first humanitarian response, we don't have the element to enact another process. And here, next slide, Christina, I will close why we move to thinking about integrated protection. One of the big debates, probably Phil will delve more into that, to trigger peace action or political action. I mean, very concretely from the ground, that we have to have one thing, which is data has to speak to each other, information has to speak to each other. Then, of course, there are other interests coming in, but that for us is the first step. So for us, protection is extremely key in the way integrated protection is defined, which is basically responding to a protection issues through different type of activity. For us, the protection issues is the coercive environment. So for us, the collective outcome in our mind is always the same. We have to ensure that we work on those factors that limit the dignity and safety of the population as a framework. Then on top of that, we can identify more specific objectives. And why it's important? Because one of the things, if we want to enact the work of local actors, for example, introducing planning, like work on the clinical Roger was mentioning in national planning, we have to have data that really links to rights, to the laws, and to other elements. So if sometimes in our conversation with ambassador or political constituencies and everything, our data, when it's purely need-based, doesn't speak to them. So because we don't have those elements that really serve for another actor to come in. So we really think that at this stage, we have to find ways to match need-based and right-based analysis somehow. So we cannot afford, we have to maintain the need-based for humanitarian intervention, but we have to find ways at a certain point to link these two type of analysis, because it's one way to have actors speaking to each other. And for us, in our example, in our implementation, integrated protection helped us doing so. To conclude with one last example. Next slide, Christina, please. This is one example of what we concretely have been managing to do in this is Palestine, but in another country, whereby we have several actors, around 12, 13 actors between local, national, and donors working together in a framework. And this is not defined as nexus. This was a way of having a collaborative work based on integrated protection, which have, for us, three key elements. One is we have to have constant yearly analysis, not based on project, but based on the situation of the territory. We have to have plan and medium to long term, and tools that allow us to slowly reinforce the capacity of local response. If we don't have this process, the nexus will only be top-down policy elements, but we still don't have the operational instruments. And I think I will stop here. And again, I think the debate is the most interesting part, because we all have to learn in this process on how to operationalize the nexus. So thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Roger and Francesco. You've actually provided some really crucial information there. The notion, Roger, of the notion of context, that where how you engage with the nexus is going to be contextual and needs to be recognized as that. And Francesco, that whole notion of data and data sharing and the agility that you were talking about between sharing that data between different organizations, how are organizations going to engage with this, how do they deal with their vested interests within this, are all going to play a role within how we understand and how we enact the nexus. So for me, I want to look at a slightly different perspective. I'm coming at it, we work with about 30 or 40 different organizations, and they have very different understandings of the way things work. And some of them have understandings within their organization. And I think you touched on it, Francesco, there can be a challenge within larger organizations, even for humanitarian teams within organizations, to talk to development teams. And even the sharing of data within an organization with multi-mandate organizations can be a real challenge. And the bigger the organization, family organizations like Save the Children, World Vision, all of those sorts, talking across the family can be an absolute nightmare as well. So there are a whole different range of challenges. So I just wanted to go to look at that peace aspect to that a little bit. And next slide, Christina. Yep, there you go. Why peace? So this is a report from a 2018 report by the World Bank. And they wanted to look at, and as you saw from Christina's presentation, the World Bank were heavily involved in this. They see the role for the bank being involved in peace processes. Yes, they are political. There's no two ways around that. But what they came out with, and this is just taken from the 22-page executive summary, and any executive summary that takes up 22 pages is not a summary, but it's the 8 things that they decided out of that is that there has been they saw in their report that there has been an increase in violent conflict. From 2005 to 2016, there was huge increases in violent conflict, and after that was after a relatively long period, probably 3 decades of real decline in conflict. So there's that process to it. They saw that peace was required, not just the humanitarian and development actors. Secondly, that human and economic costs of violent conflict requires all concerned actors to work more collaboratively. They felt that there needed to be more collaboration there. Third, the best way to prevent societies from descending into crisis, including conflict, is to ensure that they are resilient through investment in inclusive and sustainable development. That link back to the SDGs and other mechanisms such as that they saw that the primary responsibility for preventive action, and Roger, you will have a smile at this, rests with states. But states are increasingly called to work with each other, or not, as the case may be, and can sometimes be key belligerents in this process. But states working with states and with other actors to achieve and sustain peace. And when you think about it at a theoretical level, that is true. If you were going to have sustained peace, then it would be states being able to work with states, being able to engage with states and engage with other actors to ensure that what was required was there. Now, whether that actually happens or not is a different question. Fifthly, exclusion from access to power, opportunity, services, security creates fertile ground for mobilising group grievances to violence. Yes, that goes without saying. You cannot marginalise people and expect them not to react to that. Growth and poverty alleviation alone will not suffice to sustain peace. So it's that is a broader understanding. Peace is not just about the lack of conflict. There are whole underlying factors that need to be dealt with. But development focus on economic growth and poverty alleviation alone is not good enough. There has to be a whole range of other factors that come into that. Inclusive decision-making is fundamental to sustaining peace at all levels. As you were talking about, Francesco, that notion about engaging locals, those people that are most affected, everybody has to be engaged in those sorts of things. As a long-term policies to address economic and social political aspirations, those are the underlying issues that need to be addressed ultimately within all of that. And lastly, acting preventatively requires building institutional capacity to contain violence and fostering systems that create incentives for peaceful and cooperative behaviour. All sounds really nice in practice. However, that's not necessarily going to work. It's an interesting report to read and provide some background, but some of the challenges. Next slide, Christina. Thank you. The whole system currently is set up for it not to be collaborative. Funding mechanisms, separate funding mechanisms, separate pots of money for humanitarian, separate pots of money for development, separate pots of money for peace building. So until we start to deal with those broader systemic issues, this isn't going to come together. The siloed approaches, as was mentioned by Francesco and Roger there, people come in with a siloed approach. They don't talk to each other within organisations nor across organisations very well. And it's understandable. People have a vested interest. We don't want, well, organisations don't want to make themselves redundant in that sense. So there is a vested interest for taking a siloed approach, for protecting your patch, and that happens. Single and multi-mandate organisations, been great to hear from one of each today. In some ways, a single mandate organisation such as MSF, it gives a strong focus to be. You're not being torn across different understandings. Multi-mandate organisations, as you were saying, Francesco, it's how do you work across those two different streams. Flexibility of donors. We talk about being agile and adaptive in programming and those sorts of things, but that is also going to require flexibility and agility and adaptation by donors to be able to do that. So again, linking back to that systemic thing, it's got to be working across the board. And what are the implications of the nexus for locally led responses? locally led responses, and I refer to that term rather than localization, but because we're a locally led response, some of the critiques of a locally led response, and in a highly politicized situation, it can be a very challenging situation because inevitably local actors are going to be politicized in some way. But where can it be used, and what is the implication of the nexus for locally led responses? Christina, just looking at humanitarianism for a minute, and we're coming with Dorothea Hillhorst speaks about classic humanitarianism and resilient humanitarianism, which I think is a really interesting juxtaposition for us to explore these days. And Roger, you were talking about, humanitarians based on principles, and inevitably it has been, as you were saying, Francesco, usually short term. It was set up that humanitarians it's based on principles, based on being, humanity, impartiality, independent, neutral, but it was only ever supposed to be a short-term exercise. As you say, we've got protracted crises, 9, 10 years longer for humanitarian engagement. Is the system actually set up to be able to deal with that in its current format? But Dorothea goes on to talk about resilient humanitarianism, that notion that do we need to be looking at a different sort of humanitarianism that is more rights-based, that is called new humanitarianism, contextual, negotiated. Things like the Nexus, the Global Compact on Refugees, brings that sort of understanding together, and that then becomes the normal, because the humanitarianism is becoming the normal, not the exceptional. And so how do we deal with what that new normal might be? So just some things to think about within that. I know that makes people feel really uncomfortable. That notion about shifting away from long-held principles and what are the implications of that within a politicized or a conflict situation. Absolutely, but let's have a look at what that might mean. Next one, Christina. So what are the opportunities? And I suppose I'm linking this back to, and we look at COVID-19 brought in a huge change to the way humanitarian action was undertaken. Nobody foresaw it. It was imposed, and yet it has had such a significant impact. So let's reimagine for a little bit about how we might work and what might be the role of the nexus within that. What will be the new normal within the humanitarian space, across the humanitarian development peace space? What will be the new normal post-COVID? We're still to find that out. But I think what we would agree on is that it is not going to be going back to what was normal. It will be a new normal, not going back to what we understood it before. So how do we then understand humanitarian development and peace? And it's been made abundantly clear tonight that notion that humanitarianism based around principles and so forth, whereas development is inherently political, has to be political. It cannot help but be political, and is rights-based as it should be. Peace also is inherently political. They are political actors that are working towards achieving peace, and often is a rights-based approach as well. But development and peace are usually focused on having to deal with the underlying causes. Humanitarianism often is not focused on dealing with underlying causes. So there needs to be that linkage between those actors to be able to deal with those causes. Otherwise, we are just going to be marching to the same beat at the same time 20 years, 30, 40, 50 years from now. What change will need to happen within that? Next slide. Right, so for me, I'm coming at it from a leadership perspective. It is the Centre for Humanitarian Leadership that I work in, and we talk with a lot of leaders about how they perceive the changes within systems and so forth. And this one, I was talking with Dr. Muhammad Faisal, who's president of Mercy Malaysia. So one of the few Southern-based international non-government organisations, and he was talking about the leadership for him in the new humanitarian space is that not only are humanitarian leaders having to lead, they're having to manage, and that he makes a differentiation between managing, which is and leading, so that cook and the chef type approach, and that leaders are going to have to empower. So it's about empowering others, but it's also about being empowered by others. It's about socializing. It's about engaging with different people. It's about being out there. It's about being in close proximity, not stepping away. You've got to be in there as a leader and being close to your teams and being close to what's happening. For Faisal, it is about localize where possible, globalize where necessary, that it's not an either-or situation. It's about innovation and linking that back to COVID. What are the innovations that organizations are bringing in to deal with COVID? And we've seen a lot of that happening. It's about negotiating, it's about being a diplomat. Both of those things are almost political in nature, but organizational politics as opposed to a broader range politics, one might say within some of that. So there are impacts of the Nexus going to be felt across the board, and I just think we need to explore what that means. There are going to be challenges, but I think there are also opportunities for us to look at that. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Phil. And thank you, Roger and Francesco. Okay, this has been an excellent presentation. Well, there are already some questions coming from students. I'm going to pick some of them. I think the ones that are more relevant. It says, Jean-Pierre, to Roger, but I think to all of you, what Nexus has done to prevent to be used to by big donors from powerful countries for the political reasons behind the field. So for example, in Sudan, some powerful countries can use Nexus actors to explore natural resources by providing them with big funds. Okay, I think the question is about how can we prevent, or how can it be prevented that big donors use the Nexus for political reasons and to intervene in particular countries like Sudan?
If you can hear me well, I'm not very aware about the context in North Sudan. I've been working in South Sudan, and again, as working with MSF, we enjoy this privileged position of not relying that much on donors, but rather on relying on our own funds. I think the secrets to try to prevent this from happening is to make sure that organizations that are in the field are able to be part of the debate on where these funds are coming from. And I'm not only talking about international organizations. I think another colleague was raising a very important point about the role of local organizations in responses like COVID, but many others. And so to me, as MSF, we always have this internal debate on should we participate on these processes or not? Should we try to talk to donors, or should we stay completely away from them? Again, Nexus is everywhere, the same way that you cannot deny, even if you're a big international organization, the importance and the role of the countries and the funds that they're providing for the humanitarian action. So we need to be on those debates. In MSF, we're particularly good at joining debates and then leaving them in the middle of it. Like we've done it probably several times. But it is true that more and more across the organization, we are engaging more strongly with countries, with the representatives, big organizations, to make sure that what we think is needed, which is the protection of the neutrality and impartiality of humanitarian action, is respected. Now, I think both Philippe and Francesco will have better insight on this specific case rather than myself.
Maybe Francesco or Phil?
I will jump very quickly because probably Phil has much more knowledge. I don't have the knowledge of the context of South Sudan, but I want to broadly answer to a question with a point of debate. One of the key things of the Nexus, which is something that has not been cleared out well, is what is called joint programming. Okay, so one of the key elements probably to look into to break down this question is, the question is, how do we do joint programming? I want to to cite a couple of examples. In one process that we're following with in Libya, for example, joint programming is coming from different organizations that are not set in Libya with all the elements. I mean, it's led by the UN, international organization and everything. But the boundary is, what should that joint programming drive completely the program of each single agency, or each single agency can keep doing his own programming, but what is important is that the design of this joint programming involves everyone, as Roger said. I mean, that's the level of discussion, because if one of the things that I agree that the question is pointing out is that if that joint programming is done not with field analysis, not with involvement, but with different organizations, well, that's the risk. I mean, that's exactly the politicization of risk. But there is a way out, because the reality on the other side is that in order to preserve our mandate, to ensure that we deliver and to ensure we deliver well, we, in the last 20, 25 years, we have coordination mechanisms, but those coordination mechanisms are not really to discuss joint programming. The coordination mechanism is to share information and share some news. So we really separated each other. Even if we are in the same area, we don't talk to each other anymore. So I think that we should build on the process of understanding how we want to do this joint programming. And for me, the key is that we don't have to change the nature of each single organization. That's something that I always hear, but with the Nexus, we have to change the way we work. I believe that mandated organization, local organization, local responder are really the best place to respond to certain sectorial elements or to certain situation, health, shelter, whatever. But what is important is that, where maybe it's the other value of the double mandated organization, is that there is connectors. There have to be connectors. So again, for me, the key of the answer, I don't have an answer, but for me, the key is on how we define the joint programming and the way we want to go on with it.
Absolutely, I would agree with all of those comments. In Sudan, yes, as in a number of other places, natural resources have driven conflict and have helped support conflict. It's not an uncommon situation, the exploitation of resources. Whether we can blame Nexus organizations or whether we can blame, yes, countries politicize these things. The geopolitics, as Roger was pointing out, drives where people are going to be acting, that drives where countries are going to be providing donor funds. We can't deny that. And so, yes, they might be providing actors with funds, whether that's about exploitation of resources, because who you back within a conflict is going to influence where you stand geopolitically at the end of that. Governments are going to be political. Institutional donors are going to be political. Businesses are going to be political when it comes to the access to resources. So it is about, as Francesco was saying, it's about those actors on the ground. How are they actually dealing with the issues that they're finding? How are they joining up to engage with what they're finding? And organizations need to be aware of what other organizations are playing in the space. It's if you know that things aren't working well, why is that? We need to be holding one another account within that. Yes, it's about sharing, but it is also holding one another to account.
Yeah. So another question that I think links also with what you were saying, Francesco, is the Nexus system with comparative advantage analysis sounds like further industrialization, professionalization of humanitarian action. Will this be a problem for small or local NGOs who can compete with big international ones concerning planning, management, and long-term orientation?
Thank you. I will answer directly, but I would like to also listen to the perspective of Phil and Roger. Thank you for the question. Yeah, I really like the question because it's true that in the humanitarian setting, we risk to overstructure everything. We have to create standard, we have to create elements. So we create ranking system, we create prioritization system, and that always brings us to this bottleneck of where then there is a tyranny of the system. So that I totally agree. Now, what I meant with my comment is completely the other way around. Now, at this stage, in many, specifically in protracted crisis, high politicized, we have to be honest, and we can't really involve, and we don't have the instrument specifically in the international organization to completely involve local organization or local constituency. Because from one side, for of course independency or other political elements, we have restrictive measures from our donor themselves, so there is no the capacity of enforcing. Then we have to recognize that even in all the restructure, even for COVID and everything, like 0.7% goes directly to local organization. The majority comes to international organization, and this is not to criticize ourselves, but we are concretely late on that. And I want to give a specific example. We, as a double mandate organization, we've been in areas I politicized with a lot of protection problems, but we are not naturally a protection organization. What we were doing in those cases, our funds and our intervention were either wash, shelter, land development. We were focusing on those because those were the nature of the projects we had. What we were doing with the real protection problems that we had around, we didn't have elements to respond to them. So, but our analysis was telling that the shift and the behavioral change that we did as an organization is that instead of using that data only for our project, for our reporting, now we sit down with local organizations that can step in. And then we try to lobby with donor to introduce local organizations that go beyond the mandate of the call proposal of the day and everything. So the risk is there, I agree. But the way I see it is that we have to, I mean, for me, it's more going back to the old way that we wanted to work. I mean, if we have 5 organizations, local actors, international actors in one area, we have to see who's best placed to intervene. And if of those 5 actors, there are 3 that are national or local and 2 international, the international have to do the process in order to get out and have the local and the local respondent to respond. That is not an easy process. And it's not something that you can do between today and tomorrow. We have to create a path and we have to have the proper analysis because there are many interests involved, and we have to, I'm really keen on always have evidences to justify the process.
Okay, unless Roger or Phil want to add something, there is here a question that links to what you.
If I may, Christina,
yeah.
If I may, just quickly.
Yes, of course.
I just wanted to link, because that was the question from Bjorn, and thank you, Francesco, for your answer. But I also want to link that with the question before it from Moshin, that notion about racism in humanitarian work. And I think we need to focus on that. It's something that we are starting to grapple with at the centre. It's becoming quite a big, that whole decolonization debate around decolonizing humanitarian work, decolonizing development. And I think we need to realize and accept that at the basis of humanitarian understandings is it has grown up in a system that has emphasized racism. There's no 2 ways around it. And that for me and for the work that we're doing, that and our new problem statement, part of our new problem statement at the centre for our new strategy is that we agree that the humanitarian system creates and perpetuates power imbalances. Part of that is observed through local responses. As you were saying, Francesco, it can be a challenge to deal with that. But at the basis of that, we cannot deny that the humanitarian system has not grown up within a racist structure. Because, and when we look at things, and we're working around that book, White Fragility by Robin DiAngelo, exploring that notion of what does it mean to be white, and engaging in this, the whole setup has been built around racist understandings, and we need to deconstruct that, and we need to be mindful of that because that has permeated what we do and how we do it, and how do we explore that in a critical way to change the system to better meet the needs of affected populations. Sorry, just had to say that one.
No, thank you.
I would like to also point out a small thing about this, because the question was actually asking me, but again, without the aim of having this topic, which is a very important and relevant one, monopolizing the session. I'm sure during the masters and during the IP, this has been discussed already. Just to point out also, all of us all of our organizations are products of the societies where they were born. All of us are products of the societies where they were born, and we cannot deny that there's different power balances, and not only about race, but I'm talking about gender also, sexual orientation, and age, disability, and so on. It is the aim of all of us, and also the aim of the new people joining the sector, to be very aware of this and what are the implications. Back to the topic of Nexus.
No, thank you. I think this is certainly something that's going to be addressed during the first semester. And as I think, as Phil, you mentioned, the humanitarian system is inherently creating power imbalances and is racist in nature. So the question is how we can change these power imbalances and power dynamics. Yeah, this is for certain going to be a focus, one of the topics that is going to be discussed in different modules in the first semester. But thank you for not forgetting for bringing up this question that was posed by one of our students. With regard to the issue of localization, yeah, there is one question from Nick and saying, Francesco, you mentioned that only 0.7 of funding has been guaranteed to local NGOs as part of the global humanitarian response for COVID. And I will say in general, there's very less financiation going to local NGOs. So why is there such a disconnect between the large UN agencies, donors, institutions, and other key actors, and the work of local responders, faith-based groups, volunteers, networks, etc.? And in particular, when we all acknowledge that the first responders are always local organizations, the local community, and this has been very clear in the COVID response. So who wants to jump?
Well, I can go first with just really because the answer will be very long. I mean, from my side, I mean, we are be very keen on understanding really how to reinforce local capacity. Of course, we have quite big dilemmas, challenges, and things. I want just to say two very quick things, probably. One is accountability. So there is this general, I mean, Phil was mentioning before, even internally, we didn't create this system of accountability. So, and we have the perception that if we work with local organizations and local responders, there's a global perception there will be less accountability, which for me is a fallacy. I mean, in a way, there are ways of doing it. So if there is a willingness to do it, we can enforce it tomorrow. I mean, so it's not a matter, you can enforce accountability at every level. So this is one of the fallacy. I mean, it has been, maybe I know it's a strong word, but it's true, and it's something that we can work. Of course, you have to pay attention, of course, risk analysis, understanding who are the actors, and all this. I give it for granted, but this is one of the elements of the challenge that we put in place. And the other is control of financial flows and the easiness. We have to really to point it out. I mean, the control of financial flow and the easiness for donors and for the whole process, even for the detection of those financial flow, it's easy if you have less actors involved. So, and if those actors are the same constituencies. These are two elements which are the key one that I want to express, but I don't want to monopolize this debate, and I would like to hear from Phil and Roger.
I would like to add a couple of things to this. I work with an organization that is a direct implementer. So we rely very little on the local actors, let's say, as local organizations, but of course, 95% of our workers are from the area and are local, and we just keep usually out of 200 or 250 people that we might have in a big intervention, we just keep a bunch of 5 or 6 people who are not from there, and usually are international staff. We have this for very clear reasons, and usually, of course, are part of the managerial positions, and acknowledging, of course, that this might bring a power imbalance, as we were mentioning. For us, it is very clear that when you work in highly unstable context in which the management of resources is a key issue and can entail and bring security issues, you want to put the decision-making power to someone who is external to the context in a way, and someone who you can remove very quick the moment there's pressures, there's threats, and so on. So one of the main reasons why we keep international staff on the ground dealing with the national and helping with the national staff colleagues is because first, we might need very specific profiles, medical profiles such as surgeons or anesthetists that are not available within the local context, but also because we want to make sure that the decision-making processes are free as much as we can from the local dynamics and the local powers and danger situations that can happen when someone who is in charge of recruitment processes or hiring people or cars or resources or choosing where to go or where to work is part of the community, in which case we would be putting an extra burden and probably putting his or her safety in a very difficult position. So this is why we keep international staff. The moment we take a decision that we know it's going to bring problems and our international staff might be threatened, we just remove the international staff and bring another one that is not attached to the context.
And you know, I agree that it is contextual, but it also links back to what we were saying, that it is the power imbalance. There is those notions about accountability, that, you know, the local organizations are perceived not to be accountable. I agree with you, Francesco. There are ways and means and I think that goes back to the power imbalances that we were talking about. But also, I think, and contextual wise, Roger, I think you're right. You know, that whole notion about internationals as a form of, almost as a form of protection, can work in those contexts. And that's in a different context. And I will talk about the Pacific here with Tropical Cyclone Harold. Yes, it's a natural disaster in those contexts. Tropical Cyclone Harold in, I think, what was it, March, April, went through, and there could be no external response. And so Solomon Islands, Vanuatu, Fiji, all had local responses, and they worked really, really well. And I think there are indicators of where local organizations did step up to the mark. They worked very well. They proved that they were accountable. They proved that they could manage those sorts of situations on their own. Where it is possible, and it's that local as possible, as global where necessary, that's the sort of situation where we need to be able to look at, okay, where is it possible, what can happen, and how do we also look at reflecting on ourselves and what we bring to this, so that we don't exclude local organizations where it is possible to actually bring them in and have them lead.
Thank you. There is a question from Solji. While he understands the importance of the Triple Nexus, he's skeptical about whether the Nexus projects will get enough funding, especially when we see places of protracted refugee situations. So the Global Compact for Refugees and the Comprehensive Refugee Response Framework that come, into this idea of the Triple Nexus had to a withdrawal case in Tanzania. And I think this is a very interesting, because there was lack of donor funding. So this is the question: if, although there is an emphasis on the Triple Nexus, when countries in more acute emergencies might get not international attention and funding. I will say,
if I may add a couple of things, yes, and we've seen this also with organizations aiming at trying to bring attention to their own program and to the country where they're working, by emphasizing some of the needs more than what we would think objectively are the needs. No, this is something we feel, and again, it comes back to the point that the funding and then the management of resources is not joint, is not neutral, is not independent, because it's coming from political bodies, as Philip was very rightly pointing out. Countries are by nature political, and their money will always be political. So I think we have a couple of questions also from the students on how could we prevent politicization of aid and so on. And again, I'm speaking from a privileged position, from an organization whose funds are almost entirely independent. We think it is this. We think that the basis of having a principled humanitarian action are independence in the management of resources. So having your own, or being able to use independently the ones you receive from other organizations or donors, and also having access to proper data, or collecting your own data so you can do a needs-based intervention and put your resources where they are most needed.
Maybe Phil or Francesco want to.
I have a comment, unless Phil, you want to go first. Okay, there is a misconception for me on all the Nexus things. I mean, at the moment there are, I don't remember now how many, but 7 to 9 Nexus exercises pushed by the UN agency through the YASC and the UNOCHA system, and there are 6 pilot countries from the European Union. There is still not an idea of the Nexus project or as an element to be funded as a whole or programmatic framework. We are not there yet. And I believe that going in that direction is a misconception. I mean, from the debate that we are having, and I here will cite example, I'm part of the working group that is working on the national guidelines of the Italian government on the Nexus. The real debate there is not, for example, the Italian government as a donor agency, is not whether the Italian government with all this funding will embark in Nexus programming. It's not that the question from the donor perspective, it's not the one that we're discussing in the working group. It is rather how do we incorporate the principle in the whole programmatic work of the Italian government. So at the moment, the debate, for example, and beside this example specifically from my experience, the discussion we are having is even within the Italian government and with all the Italian actors, we have this divide because we siloed, we have different constituencies working on development, peace, and humanitarian. So before even going to the global nexus, there is need of preparing the internal, I mean, cooking the house. And so the real discussion on the nexus from this donor perspective with us, the international organizations, which we are really, really involved, but there is a real nice collaborative process to think together of a national guide on the nexus is how do we bring ourselves together as an Italian system? Then how that Italian system can contribute effectively to a nexus program. That's the debate. So for me, it's not another question if the Nexus project is going to be funded, because for me, it's a bit of the old way of thinking. We go on if we get funded as a project. But for me, it's reshaping the question in, well, the Nexus should give us, is giving a roadmap for a behavioral change. And that's the key. So it's bringing us back to rediscuss, to rethink, to every single organization internally to discuss the way it does things. And for me, it's the most important elements to look into now. The result of that will tell us what will happen in terms of finance and programming.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more, Francesco. That notion about organizations themselves have to work within themselves and across organizations to present a more consolidated front when dealing with donors. I just want to take this out a little bit further because yes, donors can be fickle and they will change their minds. My concern is, again, coming back to COVID-19, the economic impact of that and how that is going to influence broader funding for humanitarian development, any of these Nexus projects over the next 5-10 years until such times as economic systems get up and that swing back towards a more internal focused set of governments around the world, whether that be in Europe, the US, the UK. The impact of that more broadly across taking some of these agendas forward, I think is going to be huge.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. There is, I think we have to, there are some questions like, so in highly politicized ongoing conflicts, such as the ones you mentioned, this is for Roger, but I think you all, Yemen, Syria, Palestine, how can the Triple Nexus be implemented? Concretely, the development part, considering that it will be constantly hindered by the events of the conflict. I think it has to do with something you've been mentioning about the different contexts. So,
and even the link and not knowing actually in these places, and one of our thinkings is there's areas in countries in which we can consider that we could move on to a more development process or steps, and others in which we continue to be on an emergency setting. No? So it's part of the complexity that the whole sector has been trying to deal with, and that is another of the buzzwords that you will keep hearing, how complex it is and how difficult it is to evaluate whether we are in an emergency setting or we should move on to developmental policies and projects. In the specific case of Yemen, we see this. The conflict is linked specifically, and many events in the conflict are linked specifically to the ongoing peace process. And when one of the parties wants to have a stronger voice, or maybe wants to deblock or unblock some part of the negotiation, you see peaks of the conflict or moves that are influencing both levels, at the level of the conflict and the level of the peace negotiations. This is why you will keep hearing that all those contexts are very complex, and that it will be always very difficult to navigate through knowing whether we should all consider and having an agreed opinion on whether we move all to development or we continue in a humanitarian phase.
So is there any regular measurement? So any way of measuring whether the humanitarian sector is moving forward in adopting the Nexus concept?
If I may, yes, there is, and just building on what you were saying, Roger, and going back to Somalia, for instance, and there's been a lot of work with the Somali Resilience Project, the SOMREP, 7 organisations coming together to start to deal with those nexus issues, because it is working in a fragile environment. Is it a humanitarian? Is it development? How do you work across that? And coming together to do exactly what you were saying, Francesco, to combine their understandings and combine their resources to explore the opportunities for flexible funding that will then, it doesn't matter whether it's, in a sense, whether it's a humanitarian or whether it's a development, but to have the agility to be able to step across that line and build in early warning systems, especially around drought and those sorts of things that can be triggers for conflict, and so forth. So being able to work across that over an extended period of time and actually get funding to do that. So yes, organizations are doing it, but again, it's not necessarily as widespread as we might like. And again, it's going to be contextual to the situation at hand.
Yeah, just adding a bit on what Phil said. I believe it has to be contextual. I mean, the only way that is contextual. I don't see now a global way of measuring these processes. The joint programming has to be contextual, the analysis to be contextual, and also because the factor that can tell us if we're moving from a humanitarian to development perspective are really contextual. And on this, I want to make a simple an example, a very concrete and maybe silly but technical example based on also linking to the question before. In Palestine, we know the problem is around occupation. So we have been working in the last 20 years with humanitarian project, humanitarian funding, with an occupation. So already 20 years with humanitarian funding is a bit of a symbol, because a humanitarian crisis or humanitarian funding is based on need. In theory, after 3-4 years, you address the need and you moved on. But here, of course, we all know that there are specific political interests. For one of the things that we're still far from having a comprehensive approach, because there are specific political reasons related to occupation that block the possibility of doing more. But humanitarian response plan. Humanitarian response plan 7-8 years ago, year after year, you will see in terms of need, wash, shelter, always the same need, bouncing from one year to the other. So we were responding. There was response in terms of humanitarian. Of course, there were illegal demolition by the government of Israel, and we will keep going. In the last 4 or 5 years, there's been a lot of efforts of not having joint funding, but joint programming, okay, which is not tackled as Nexus, but it is an effort between different organizations, different donors that decide to sit down together. And you can see now that the type of needs reflected in the humanitarian plan are changing. So this is one element. Those needs are, instead of being completely need-based, now they move to protection and they move in another direction. And on the other side, you see specific joint strategy with developmental donors. One key point on all of this, that probably maybe but Phil and Roger knows better. One of the big problems now that we had in the past is that the humanitarian development actor, they sit at one table or at 2 tables, coordinating themselves, and then the one that can really enact actions to solve peace and political process, they sit at another table. That's the problem. So imagine ourselves in a house with 3 rooms with closed door. That's the reality of the situation. So what is the solution in those contexts? Being able to open the door and to actually discuss it with each other. For me, that's, I know that it's probably silly presented like this, but for me, it reflects very well the situation.
Okay, there is a very concrete question, but what is the distinction between the nexus and coordination, and in which ways does the nexus affect coordination?
Okay, sorry, I will, it seems I'm monopolizing this. No, but I will very quick. Coordination doesn't mean coherence and complementarity. Coordination can be stayed just at the level of sharing of information, and this is very well done, and we are very good, and we have many systems. What is the next step? I mean, I would say.
Yeah, coordination generally takes quite a narrow perspective around that, and doesn't necessarily look at those broader things as coordination. Yeah, and so it doesn't open itself up. I agree. What is the next step? How do we get that broader discussion going?
Yeah, if I may jump in, I will say this is a typical thing you also will usually discuss in class. Coordination is a means to an end. It's not an end in itself. You coordinate for something. So you coordinate in order to get joint analysis. You coordinate in order to collaborate better, to achieve something. Yeah, it can never be the end. It's a way. It's a mean to an end. There is I think there is.
If I may, can I bring, of course, the MSF perspective to this that everybody is waiting for? We do think the same. Coordination needs to be a means towards the goal, and usually we very much enjoy coordinating with others. We're very good at bilaterals, not so good at multilaterals. We're very good at bilaterals, though, I think. And I think that being coordinated with other organizations is one thing. Being coordinated by other organizations is a completely different thing. And this is what usually hinders the efforts of organizations, feeling that there's a balance of power and there's someone guiding or leading. Whereas as opposed to a more horizontal organization and sharing of data and trust, which I think it's one of the big issues and challenges in this sector, the lack of trust within different organizations and across different organizations.
Thank you, Roger. Yeah, in fact, it's who coordinates, and it's again can become an issue of power imbalance. So many interesting questions, and you can that show how complex, yeah, is this issue. There is, and here is, yeah, a question on: is there any connection between different discussions related to justice with principles of nexus discussions and approaches? That's not an easy one.
I let the other colleagues because I have no idea about this.
You would hope that justice needs to underpin any discussions around peace, and really justice needs to underpin any discussions, around development. And in a way, justice should influence notions of humanitarianism, but because of the principles, justice doesn't get spoken about as justice in that sense. But justice as in needs-based approaches and those sorts of things, meeting the needs of the most vulnerable, is a just way of doing things. However, justice as a concept has to be embedded in peace discussions and really has to inform and embed development for anything to be sustainable, whether that be peace or development, and justice has to be embedded as part of that. How embedded it is, I wouldn't like to say on individual circumstances.
I don't really have probably anything clever to say about this. And also, as Roger, I want to be very honest. Now, one thing that it's interesting for me in the question is because justice is between brackets. So that for me is a concept that we should think about. What is justice? What are we thinking about in terms of justice? Because if we think about justice in terms of legal system, eventually, I mean, with the way states are built, it's the ultimate goal. And if we don't change the legal system in a state, we cannot ensure and enforce justice. But this we should apply first to our own country in Europe instead, because then to the work we are doing. But if we are thinking of a broader concept, well, there are many other elements involved. I mean, we like to break down this to the concept of dignity and safety that can help us out in breaking in other elements that we can tackle. Then my understanding of that reached that point. I wanted to just share this reflection.
I agree. It has to be that broader concept, because I think we need to argue that any justice system is going to be unjust for some people. If we're going to talk about that narrow system about a legal justice system, it automatically excludes a whole bunch of marginalized groups. So I think it needs to be that broader concept for sure.
Okay. Well, I think we have ended. I think we have come to we are already at 11:30. It has been a very interesting discussion. I think brings a lot of food for thought for all of us. In fact, I had many questions, but I think this is not. We will have other opportunities to discuss on the boundaries of humanitarianism, which also has to do with all these discussions. I think, Phil, what you mentioned, this paper of Thea Hilsdorf on resilient humanitarianism, which brings questions to which are the boundaries, and if humanitarianism has to be, where does it end, and the problem with protracted situations where the nexus should come in, ideally, bring these questions very much in. So we've been finishing the panels, asking you if you could give one piece of advice to the new NOAA students. So maybe I see Roger on top of the screen. So sorry, maybe unless Francesco or Phil want to jump in.
I can start. We had a side event yesterday talking to some of the students about mentoring, and I think I'm just going to repeat myself on the messages that I sent yesterday across, because I think they're very important. And as a former student of the master's, I think they were very important for me. The first one is be proactive. Try to look for the things that are interesting to you, talk to people, network, try to understand, because in this sector is very complex and very changing. You probably have seen the levels of mobility and the levels of turnover that they are. So be proactive on trying to find your space on it. The second is weigh your decisions as a humanitarian working at all levels, but know that probably none of the decisions you're going to be taking are going to be life-changing, in the sense that do not put that much pressure on yourself on knowing what you want to do, where you want to end up, because we all had an idea 5 years ago, 10 years ago about where we wanted to be, and we are in completely different places. And the third one that I want to hammer again and again to all students is take care of yourself. Stay very, very much aware about how you're feeling, what your priorities are, and also your resilience to what you're going to be working in and witnessing, and take care of yourself and put yourself always first, because only by this you're going to be able to stay good enough and healthy enough at all levels to be able to help and work with others.
Thank you, Roger.
I'll jump in right away. Well, I subscribe 100% what Roger said. I mean, completely. And the last, I want to add up a fourth element related to the topic of today. The Nexus, try to use the Nexus, or whatever is written around the Nexus, to rethink the basic of this job, a bit about the humanitarian job. I mean, which has to be about collaboration, about being coherent, and being widening up with you will find yourself in roles, actions, sectors, because it's the way the structure and the system is built. But the key for the future, if we want to really progress, is go back to a real collaboration, and that starts from each one of us. One of the bigger debates that we're having with experienced humanitarian, when we're discussing the element of the nexus, we have to change the way we work. We have to have an organizational change. We have to have a behavioral change. So what I want to say is that the students, that you are on the outside, you are this behavioral change. Okay, you are this organizational change. So if we really want to bring change and improve the system, embed this principle as we made them yours. So even if you're going to fit in one specific role, in one specific task, always wide up. It's always good to speak to the guy of the other organization. It's always good to share with the guy of the other organization. It's really basic and it's really simple, but it will make a difference.
Thank you, Francesco.
Yeah, I would fully support everything that's been said, especially that self-care. I think we underestimate that at our own harm, and that it is so important to what we do, and get that in early and start your processes on that as early as possible. The other thing is, I agree with you, Francesco, it is being the change we want to see. You are the future of the humanitarian system. Where do you want the humanitarian system to be going? Take nothing for granted and continue to ask the questions and to explore the opportunities about collaboration, about exploring these ideas, whether it be the nexus or other things that can influence them, but keeping in mind that it is about the affected populations. And those have to be at the forefront of what we do, whilst we look after ourselves as well.
Thank you. Well, thank you very much, Roger, Francesco, Phil, for this great example of joint collaboration. I think it's been a fantastic panel. Thank you to all the students for listening and participating. And well, we are in almost the end of the IP. I hope you all have enjoyed the program, and we will have opportunities to keep collaborating and discussing all these issues in the coming months. Thank you very much to all of you.
Great.
Thank you so much, Christina.
Christina.
Thank you, guys. See you soon.
Thanks, Roger. Thanks, Francesco.
Thank you,
Thank
Phil.
you, everybody.
Thank you, Roger. And thank you all students for being very active.
Yes, absolutely. You make it. Yes.